At the family dinner, my daughter-in-law leaned close to my ear. Her perfume was too sweet, too strong. Then she whispered, her voice cutting through the chatter around the table. "I'm pregnant with your husband's child. You pathetic old woman." For a second, the room seemed to tilt. The clinking silverware, the hum of conversation, even the ticking wall clock, all of it froze. I stared at her porcelain smile, the way her red lips curled with satisfaction. Then I did the only thing I could. I laughed, softly, almost kindly. "I see," I said, steadying my voice. "Don't worry, dear." I lifted my wine glass, pretending to toast, and took a slow sip. The red liquid trembled, but my hand did not. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I'll know how far my story has reached." The dinner had started like any other Sunday evening. I'd set the table early, polishing the same silverware I'd used for 40 years. The scent of rosemary chicken filled the house, warm and familiar. My husband, Richard, sat at the head of the table, my old seat. And beside him, his new favorite person, my son's wife, Emily. She laughed too easily at his jokes, touching his arm with that careless affection that used to belong to me. I'd told myself for months that it was harmless, she was just trying to be friendly. But there was a glimmer in her eyes tonight, a quiet triumph. Like she knew something I didn't. My son, Daniel, arrived late, claiming traffic. He kissed Emily on the cheek, not noticing how her eyes flicked toward Richard. Or how Richard's hand rested just a second too long on her shoulder. I noticed. A mother always does. Dinner went on with small talk about work and weather. I smiled, nodded, and passed the potatoes. The conversation danced around me like I was a ghost in my own home. Every now and then, I caught Richard glancing at me. Guilt flashing in his eyes. Gone before it settled. When the roast was served, Emily leaned close. Her hand brushed mine. Her voice was sugar-coated venom. "I guess some women can still give a man what he really needs." She pulled back, smiling at the others, as if she'd said nothing cruel at all. My heart didn't race, it slowed. Because suddenly, everything clicked. The missed dinners, the hushed calls. The way she always helped Richard in his study after meals. I cut a piece of chicken, chewing slowly, silently. She expected me to break, to lash out. Instead, I looked at her and smiled. A calm, practiced smile that came from years of holding families together. "You must be very proud of yourself," I said quietly. Her fork paused midair, confusion flashing across her face. I raised my glass again. "To new beginnings," I murmured. The others joined the toast, unaware that an entire world had just cracked beneath the tablecloth. That night, after the guests left, I cleared the dishes alone. The scent of perfume still lingered in the air. A sickly sweet reminder of humiliation dressed as confidence. I washed each plate carefully, one by one, listening to the faint hum of Richard's voice upstairs, talking softly to her. I didn't cry. I didn't storm in and demand answers. Instead, I dried my hands, poured myself another glass of wine, and wrote one small note on the grocery pad by the fridge. DNA test, clinic appointment, Tuesday, 9:30 a.m. I placed the pen down carefully. The sound of laughter upstairs drifted through the ceiling like ghosts. And for the first time in 40 years, I didn't feel like the wife in this house. I felt like the witness. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen blinds, cutting pale stripes across the tiled floor. I stood at the sink, washing the same wine glass I'd held the night before, the faint scent of rosemary and detergent mixed with the stale perfume still clinging to the dining room curtains. From upstairs came the muffled sound of voices, Richard's and Emily's. It was faint, just enough for me to catch the rhythm of laughter. I turned on the faucet a little harder. There was a time when that sound, his laughter, meant peace to me. Now it only marked the distance between us. I spent the morning pretending to clean, dusting shelves that didn't need it, straightening picture frames that were already straight, It was easier to polish surfaces than face the rot beneath them. When I finally looked up, I realized I'd been wiping the same spot on the counter for 10 minutes. Richard came down for coffee, his tie crooked, eyes tired. "Morning," he muttered. "Morning," I replied. Our voices collided and fell flat in the air between us. He didn't mention the dinner. Didn't mention Emily's whisper, or my laughter, or the way she'd brushed his hand as she stood to clear the plates. He just asked if we had any more sugar. When he left for the office, I poured the rest of his coffee down the sink and whispered, "Sweet enough already." The following days were an exercise in silence. Emily texted Daniel often, her messages popping up on the family phone plan that Richard refused to disconnect. I noticed small things, a new bracelet on her wrist, the faint shimmer of perfume that matched the one I'd smelled on Richard's jacket. At night, I heard him on the phone in his study, speaking softly, too softly. When I entered, the conversation always ended mid-sentence. He'd look up, startled, like a boy caught sneaking cookies before dinner. "Just work," he'd say. And I'd nod, as if lies could hold a marriage together. Sunday arrived again, far too quickly. Daniel came over, cheerful, clueless. He kissed Emily on the cheek, hugged his father, and gave me flowers, lilies, white and fragrant. For a moment, I almost believed we could pretend to be normal. Then Emily leaned over my shoulder and said, just loud enough for me to hear, "These are my favorite flowers too." I smiled politely, placing them in a vase. Her reflection shimmered in the glass beside mine, young, confident, victorious. I wondered if she saw what I saw, a woman who'd traded respect for attention, and thought she'd won. Dinner passed in slow motion. Daniel talked about work, about a new promotion, about the baby they'd soon have. Richard nodded approvingly. Emily squeezed Daniel's hand, but her gaze kept drifting toward Richard's wine glass. My appetite vanished halfway through the meal. I excused myself, claiming I'd forgotten dessert, and stood alone in the kitchen, gripping the counter until my knuckles whitened. The sound of laughter from the dining room floated in, 3 voices, perfectly in sync. Mine was missing. That night, as I folded the tablecloth, a memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought of in years. It was the first dinner Richard and I had ever hosted after our wedding. I'd burned the roast, spilled the gravy, and nearly dropped the cake. He'd laughed, kissed my forehead, and said, "If we have love, we'll never go hungry." Now, standing in that same dining room, surrounded by betrayal disguised as family, I couldn't decide which part hurt more, the lie he told me then, or the one he lived now. The next morning, I drove to the clinic. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. "Purpose of your visit?" she asked. "DNA testing," I said simply. She handed me a clipboard. I filled out the form with steady hands. It wasn't anger that drove me, it was clarity. As I waited, I noticed a young couple in the corner. They were holding hands, whispering about baby names. The woman's laughter reminded me of Emily's, light, rehearsed, meant to be heard. When the nurse called my name, I followed her into a small, sterile room. "Just a quick swab," she said. I nodded, opening my mouth, tasting the metallic tang of inevitability. She labeled the sample and placed it into a clear bag marked confidential. As she sealed it, I thought of Emily's smug smile, of Richard's guilty eyes. Confidential. What a lovely word for secrets everyone already knows. Back home, I tucked the receipt from the clinic inside my recipe book, between chocolate pie and chicken stew. If anyone ever found it, they'd assume it was a grocery list. It wasn't. It was the first step in taking my life back. That evening, Richard asked what I'd done that day. "Just errands," I said. He nodded, satisfied, and returned to his newspaper. Emily texted him as he read. The phone lit up with her name, then dimmed again. He didn't notice my reflection watching from the glass cabinet behind him. Before bed, I stood at the mirror brushing my hair. The woman staring back looked calm, almost serene. Not broken. Not bitter. Just awake. I turned off the light and whispered into the darkness. Tuesday, 9:30. The truth always keeps its appointments. Tuesday came with the great chill of early autumn. The kind of morning where even the sunlight seems hesitant to enter the house. I woke before Richard did. He was still asleep, his hands stretched across the bed, searching for something that wasn't there anymore. I slipped out quietly, leaving the faint scent of lavender on the pillow. The clinic called around noon. The receptionist's voice was polite, professional. Your results will be ready within 5 business days, Mrs. Hale. Thank you, I said, calm as glass. 5 days. 5 days of pretending not to know what I already knew. That evening, Emily came by to check on me. She brought a pie she didn't bake, wearing perfume that didn't suit her age. Her smile was sugar-crusted and hollow. Thought you might want company, she said. Oh, I have plenty, I replied, glancing at the photo wall. 40 years worth. She sat down anyway, her eyes wandering around the living room like a thief scanning for valuables. You know, she began, slicing the pie, Daniel and I have been talking about the future, about how we might need more space, with the baby coming and all. I stirred my tea slowly. Space, I repeated, you'll need it, yes, some things grow better when they're far from what poisons them. She laughed, too loudly, too high-pitched. Are you calling yourself poison? Or me? Does it matter? I smiled. One of us is pretending not to taste it. Her fork paused midair. For a second, I saw it, just a flicker, the crack in her mask. Fear. Then she hid it behind another smile. Well, she said, standing, I should go. I'll let Richard know you're doing fine. Oh, please do, I said, tell him the truth for once. She froze for a heartbeat, then grabbed her purse and left without another word. Later that night, I heard the front door again. Richard's footsteps, heavy, uncertain. He stopped in the kitchen, where I sat waiting with the lights low. Emily said you were upset. He started, voice cautious. Did she? I folded my hands. Did she also tell you why? He frowned, avoiding my eyes. I don't want to argue. Mabel. I almost smiled at the word argue. As if this was a disagreement over curtains or groceries, not the slow erosion of a marriage. Then don't, I said softly, just listen. He didn't. He turned away, pouring himself whiskey instead. Daniel told me the baby's due in March. He muttered, it's a blessing, isn't it? I looked at him, long and quiet. Yes, I said, a blessing for whoever the father is. He froze mid-sip. The glass trembled. For once, he looked straight at me. Mabel, what are you saying? Nothing yet, I said, standing, but soon. The next few days passed like fog. Daniel stopped by less often. Emily had convinced him I needed space. Richard stayed late at work, or said he did. And I went on with my routine. Cooking for one, cleaning a house that didn't feel like mine. On Friday, the call came. The clinic. Mrs. Hale, the voice said, your DNA results are ready for pickup. You can come anytime before 6. I glanced at the clock. 4:15. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The nurse handed me a sealed envelope, her expression neutral. She didn't know that inside that plain paper folder was the quiet end of something sacred. I didn't open it right away. I drove to the lake instead, the same one where Richard used to take me when we were newly married. The water shimmered like glass, reflecting clouds that looked heavier than they should. I sat there with the envelope in my lap, feeling its weight shift with every breath. When I finally tore it open, I expected shock, anger, maybe grief. What came instead was stillness. The kind that happens when you already know the ending, but you read it anyway, just to be sure. The test confirmed it. The unborn child wasn't Richard's. It wasn't even close. That night, Emily called. Dinner tomorrow, she said brightly, at Daniel's place, family only. Of course, I said, wouldn't miss it. My voice was calm, controlled, like a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. After the call ended, I placed the folder on the dining table and stared at it for a long time. Its presence filled the room, louder than any argument, heavier than any confession. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. Inside, I smiled for the first time in weeks. Saturday came dressed in sunshine, mocking in its cheerfulness. I baked an apple tart, the one Emily always pretended to like. When I arrived at Daniel's house, she greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. Her lipstick left a faint mark on my skin, like a brand. "Glad you could come, Mom," Daniel said warmly. Of course, I smiled. Wouldn't want to miss a family celebration. Dinner was loud, cheerful, artificial. Laughter that didn't reach the eyes. Emily was glowing, or pretending to. She touched her belly every few minutes, as if rehearsing for a role. Halfway through dessert, she looked at me and said, "Mom, would you like to be godmother to our child?" Her tone was honey, her eyes knives. I took a sip of tea. "Only if the child belongs to our family, dear." The room fell silent. Daniel looked confused. Richard's fork froze midair. Emily's smile stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Oh, nothing," I said lightly. "Just a little joke. You know how DNA can be so unpredictable." Her face drained of color, just a shade paler than the cream on her pie. She forced a laugh, but her voice trembled. "You and your jokes, Mabel." "Always loved science," I said softly. "It never lies." After dinner, Richard followed me to the porch. "What was that about?" he asked. "Ask Emily," I said. "She knows." "Mabel, please." 5 days, I whispered. That's how long it took for the truth to grow teeth. He looked at me then. Really looked. There was fear in his eyes. Not of me, but of what he'd let happen under his own roof. I left before anyone could say goodbye. The night air was cool, sharp. The stars looked cruelly bright, like witnesses who'd seen too much. Back home, I placed the DNA envelope inside a drawer, beside my wedding photo. 2 pieces of paper. One promised forever. The other proved forever was a lie. I turned off the light and sat in the dark, listening to the silence settle around me like dust. This was no longer grief. It was preparation. Because tomorrow, the game would change. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it hum above me like time itself refusing to stop. Every turn of the blades pulled up memories I thought I'd buried. When did I start losing him? Not the day Emily appeared. No, it was long before that, years ago, when I began shrinking myself to fit inside his life. I used to think love was about compromise. Now I know it's often about erasure. I met Richard when I was 23. He was the kind of man who could fill a room just by standing in it. Confident, warm, charming. He made promises easily, and I, young, naive, believed every one. He said he wanted a partner, not a housekeeper. But over time, the lines blurred. I became the woman who packed his lunches, ironed his shirts, and stayed quiet when he came home late. Because that's what good wives did. That's what my mother had taught me. I used to wait for him by the window every evening, watching the headlights sweep across the driveway. Even when he stopped coming home on time, I waited. Even when the smell of another woman's perfume lingered on his coat. I told myself it was nothing. Because if I didn't believe in him, who would? Now, looking back, I realize it wasn't love that kept me. It was habit. And habit is the slowest kind of death. I remember Daniel's childhood. He used to run into the kitchen every morning, still in his pajamas, demanding pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. Richard never helped. He said mornings were his quiet time. So it was just me, a spatula, and a little boy who thought the world was safe because his mother smiled. When Daniel got older, he began to copy his father, the walk, the tone, even the way he avoided eye contact during arguments. But there were moments, brief and bright, when I saw my boy again. When he'd ask if I needed help in the garden, or bring me flowers from the yard. Those moments are what I kept. Because love, even the smallest scraps of it, was still something to hold on to. And maybe that's why Emily hurt so deeply. Because I gave her the same grace I gave Richard. I welcomed her in, taught her family recipes, shared my jewelry when she had nothing fancy to wear. I wanted her to feel like she belonged. She took that kindness and turned it into a weapon. Now, every time I walk through this house, I see ghosts of my own making. The dining table where I hosted birthdays and holidays. The curtains I sewed by hand. The photo albums lined neatly on the shelf. They're not just memories, they're evidence. Proof of how much I gave, and how easily they took. I dusted the mantel this morning and found a photo of Richard and me from our 20th anniversary. We were smiling, holding wine glasses, pretending nothing was broken. I stared at that picture until my eyes blurred. Then I put it face down. Later that afternoon, Daniel called. "Mom, about last night, you seemed a little tense." I almost laughed. A little tense. That's what they call it when your life cracks in half and you manage not to scream. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said. "How's Emily?" "She's tired. The pregnancy's been rough." "I imagine it has," I said quietly. Truth has that effect. He didn't understand, not yet. But he would. Before hanging up, he said, "You're still coming for dinner Sunday, right?" I hesitated. "I'll be there," I replied. "There's something I need to give Emily." That night, I opened my old journal. The leather cover was worn, soft from decades of being handled. Inside were pages of grocery lists, recipes, tiny notes to myself. And tucked between them, pressed flat like fragile leaves, were receipts, small proofs of love. One for the down payment on this house. One for Daniel's college tuition. One for Richard's surprise birthday trip to Boston that he later took without me. Each slip of paper told a story, not of generosity, but of sacrifice mistaken for love. I had been funding my own invisibility for 40 years. I poured myself tea and sat by the window, watching dusk creep across the garden. The roses were blooming again, stubborn and beautiful. Richard had planted them for me on our 10th anniversary. He used to joke that they'd outlive us both. Now I wasn't so sure he was wrong. As the sky darkened, I whispered to myself, "You gave them everything, and they mistook it for weakness." The tea cooled in my hands. And for the first time, I didn't feel pain. I felt clarity. By midnight, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to beg, or cry, or confront anyone in anger. That would give them too much power. Instead, I would do what I'd always done, quietly, carefully, completely. I pulled out a folder and slipped the DNA report inside. Along with copies of Richard's financial records I'd quietly printed months ago. Emily wasn't the only one who could keep secrets. Then I packed a small box, just the essentials. My mother's rosary, the silver locket Daniel gave me when he was 10, and the house keys I'd soon return. Before going to bed, I wrote one final note in my journal. I spent 40 years tending a garden that never belonged to me. Tomorrow, I plant my own. The next morning, I woke to Richard's voice downstairs. He was on the phone with someone, his tone sharp, defensive. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew. Emily had told him something. Maybe about the test, maybe about me. I came down the stairs quietly. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. His face was pale, eyes red from a sleepless night. "Mabel," he said softly, "we need to talk." "No," I replied, "you need to listen." I placed the DNA report on the counter. He reached for it, hesitated. "Is it true?" he whispered. "You'll have to ask her," I said, "but you already know the answer." He looked at me like a man who'd just realized his home was built on sand. "I didn't mean for any of this." "Spare me," I interrupted. "You meant for convenience, you meant for comfort, but you never meant for me." He said nothing. And I didn't wait for him to. I turned, picked up my coat, and walked toward the door. He called my name once, softly, almost kindly. But kindness, at this stage, was just another form of cruelty. Outside, the air smelled like rain. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and old roses. I breathed it in, slow and steady. Behind me, through the window, I saw Richard still standing in the kitchen, frozen, small, finally alone. For a moment, I pitied him. Then I remembered what pity had cost me all these years. I got in the car and started the engine. The road ahead was empty. And for the first time in decades, that emptiness felt like freedom. The rain didn't stop for 2 days. It fell steady and soft, the kind that blurs the world and makes every sound seem far away. I didn't go back to the house. Didn't call Richard. Didn't check my messages. I rented a small apartment above a florist shop downtown. The air there smelled like soil and lilies, clean, new, alive. The woman who ran the shop, Nora, was in her 70s. She reminded me of myself 20 years ago, sharp eyes, steady hands, and a kindness that didn't beg to be noticed. When I signed the lease, she said, "You look like someone starting over." "I suppose I am," I replied. "Well," she smiled, "good soil can grow again, even after a storm." The first week passed quietly. I filled my days with simple things, watering plants, reading old books, making tea. But peace never stays uninvited. It always waits for noise to return. One morning, while I was paying bills at the small table by the window, the shop bell downstairs rang. Then came Nora's voice calling, "Mrs. Hale, there's someone asking for you." For a moment, my chest tightened. I thought maybe Richard had found me. But when I came down the stairs, it wasn't him. It was Clara, the housekeeper who'd worked for us for over 15 years. Her face lit up when she saw me. "Mrs. Hale, I wasn't sure you'd still be here." I blinked, surprised. "Clara, how did you?" "Mr. Hale told everyone you were taking time to rest," she said, "but that woman, Emily, she's been around the house every day, acting like she owns the place." Nora glanced between us, sensing the tension, then quietly excused herself to the back. Clara lowered her voice. "Ma'am, I wouldn't have come if it wasn't important." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded envelope. "I found this on Mr. Hale's desk. Thought you should see it." Inside was a document, part of a property transfer. The signature space was blank, but my name was printed clearly beside the words grantor of ownership. Emily's name was listed right below, labeled beneficiary. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "She's trying to take the house," Clara whispered, "and Mr. Hale's been meeting with her lawyer. Says it's for tax reasons." Of course. The timing was perfect. Destroy the wife, inherit the home. I folded the paper carefully, my hands steady. "Thank you, Clara," I said, "you did the right thing." Her eyes filled with tears. "You've always been good to me. I can't stand watching her do this to you." I placed a hand over hers. "You've done enough. Leave the rest to me." She hesitated. "Ma'am, she's also." I looked up. "What?" "She's been visiting a clinic. Not the one you went to. A private one." The pieces fell into place instantly. The pregnancy, the lies, the fear in her eyes at dinner. It was all part of a larger performance. I thanked Clara again, walked her out, and stood at the door until her car disappeared down the street. When I turned around, Nora was waiting behind the counter, pretending to rearrange flowers. "You don't owe me an explanation," she said softly. "I know what betrayal smells like. It lingers longer than perfume." I almost smiled. I'm learning that myself. That night, I pulled out the folder from my bag, the DNA report. The receipts, now joined by the property document. 3 items. 3 weapons. And I hadn't even raised my voice once. I began making notes in a small notebook, just as I'd done during my first years of marriage. Only this time, I wasn't tracking meal plans or birthdays. I was building a record. Dates, conversations, witnesses. Every small moment of deceit. I remembered how Emily's eyes darted when I mentioned DNA. How Richard flinched when I said, truth. Even Daniel's confusion, his blind faith in a woman who'd turned his father into a fool. They were all pieces of a puzzle. And I was finally seeing the picture clearly. 2 days later, Nora brought me a cup of tea while I was sorting papers. "Do you mind if I ask something personal?" she said. "Depends how personal." She smiled. "Do you still love him?" The question lingered like smoke. I stared at the steam rising from my cup. "I don't know," I said at last. "Maybe I loved who I thought he was. Or maybe I just loved the idea that someone could need me." "Needing isn't loving," she said quietly. "It's using, dressed in affection." Her words hit harder than she knew. Later that week, Clara called again. Her voice trembled. "Mrs. Hale, something's happening tonight. They're having dinner with a lawyer. I think she's making him sign the papers." I looked at the clock, 6:45. Dinner hour. How poetic. "Thank you, Clara," I said. "Don't get involved any further. I'll handle it." I hung up, opened my drawer, and pulled out the envelope containing the DNA report. It was time. At 8 p.m., I drove back to the house. The driveway lights were on. Through the dining room window, I saw them, Richard, pale and tired, Emily, glowing with triumph, and a man in a suit beside her. Flipping through papers. I didn't knock. I just walked in. The room fell silent. "Mabel?" Richard stammered. "What are you?" "I forgot something," I said calmly, placing the envelope on the table. "A little truth you might find useful before signing anything else." Emily's smile faltered. "What's this?" she asked. "The results of your favorite secret," I said. "The baby you've been using as leverage." Richard's eyes widened. "Mabel." "Read it," I said. He hesitated, then opened the envelope. His hand trembled as he scanned the page. Once, twice. Then he looked up, face ashen. "It's not mine." Emily shot up from her chair. "That's ridiculous. You probably forge." "Sit down," I interrupted, my voice sharp but steady. "For once in your life, stop lying." The lawyer cleared his throat awkwardly. "Maybe I should." "Yes," I said, "maybe you should." He gathered his things and left without another word. When the door closed, Emily turned on me. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "This isn't about winning," I said. "It's about ending." Richard sank into his chair, staring at the paper like it might vanish if he blinked. "Mabel, I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I replied. "You never looked long enough to see anything." Emily's face twisted with panic. "You can't prove it was me who planned the transfer." "Oh, I can," I said quietly, pulling another sheet from my folder. "Clara saw everything, and I have copies." She froze. Her mouth opened, then shut. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain hitting the windows. Then I said, almost kindly, "Take your lies and go, Emily, before this gets uglier than it needs to be." She looked at Richard, desperate. But he didn't move. Didn't even lift his head. And just like that, she grabbed her purse and left, heels clicking against the tile like a slow countdown to silence. After she was gone, Richard tried to speak. I stopped him with a raised hand. "Don't," I said softly. "You had your chance to protect what mattered." I walked to the door, paused, and looked back once. "You can keep the house, Richard. It's full of ghosts anyway." He didn't answer. He just sat there, staring at the DNA report, his reflection fractured in the wine glass beside him. When I returned to my apartment, Nora was waiting up. She took one look at my face and said, "It's done, isn't it?" "Yes," I whispered, "it's done." She handed me a cup of chamomile tea. "For the nerves," she said. I took it, sipped slowly, and felt the warmth spread through me. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the lamplight. Clean again. I leaned against the window and whispered. Sometimes, truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to arrive on time. And for the first time in months, I slept without dreaming. Morning light came quietly through the window, touching everything in gold. For the first time in months, I didn't wake to tension in my chest. No whispered lies behind closed doors. No footsteps pacing above me. Just silence and the faint sound of Nora watering her flowers downstairs. I sat at the small kitchen table, drinking coffee from a chipped mug. It wasn't much, but it felt honest. Honesty had become my luxury now. The events of the night before replayed in my mind like an old film, Emily's face draining of color. Richard's silence, the soft thud of the door closing behind her. For 40 years, I'd lived my life smoothing over other people's chaos. Now, I was finally letting them live in it. By noon, the phone rang. It was Daniel. "Mom, what happened last night?" His voice was tight, defensive. "Emily's saying you've humiliated her. That you made up some story about the baby not being Dad's." I said nothing for a moment. "Daniel," I asked quietly, "do you really think I'd lie about something like that?" He hesitated. I don't know what to think anymore." "That's progress," I said softly. "You're finally thinking." He let out a shaky breath. "She left. Mom packed her things, said she needed time." "She'll need more than time," I murmured. "She'll need a conscience." "Don't talk about her like that," he snapped. "I'm talking about truth, not her," I replied. "If you want to find it, you know where to look." Then I hung up. Nora walked in just then, wiping her hands on her apron. "Trouble?" she asked. "Family," I said. She nodded like she understood every unspoken word. "You can't fix broken glass by staring at the pieces." "No," I said, "but you can stop cutting yourself trying to hold them." She smiled. "Good, you're learning." That evening, I went for a walk through the small park nearby. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. Couples passed by, holding hands, laughing softly. For years, I'd envied that kind of peace. Now, I wasn't sure I wanted it anymore. There's a strange freedom in not needing anyone. It doesn't mean you stop caring, it just means you stop expecting. I sat on a bench overlooking the pond and pulled out my notebook. For the past week, I'd been keeping a record, not just of what they'd done to me, but what I was doing for myself. Every act of calm defiance. Every small decision to reclaim a piece of the woman I used to be. Entry for today: told the truth. Walked away, didn't apologize. I smiled as I wrote it. Revenge didn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it was just a quiet refusal to keep bleeding for people who never noticed you were cut. A few days later, Clara called again. She sounded nervous. "Mrs. Hale, I think you should know. Mr. Hale's not doing well. He's been drinking again." I closed my eyes. Of course he was. The man who'd spent decades avoiding pain had finally run out of people to take it for him. "Thank you, Clara," I said, "but he'll have to clean his own mess now." There was silence on the line. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "You're stronger than anyone gives you credit for." I smiled faintly. I just stopped being afraid of what I already survived. That night, as I was closing the blinds, I noticed an envelope slid under my door. No name. No return address. Inside, a single page, handwritten. "Mabel, I'm sorry for everything. I don't know where to begin. Please, let me see you. Richard." I stared at the letter for a long time. His handwriting looked smaller than I remembered. Shaky. Once, that would have broken me. Now, it just felt late. I folded the page and tucked it inside my notebook, between the entries that marked my turning point. It didn't deserve a reply. It deserved to stay where it belonged, between lessons learned and wounds healed. A week passed before I saw him again. I was at the grocery store, reaching for a carton of milk, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mabel." I turned. He looked older, 10 years older. Maybe more. His eyes were dull, his tie askew. He held out his hand, uncertain. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I said. He looked at me for a long moment. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly. "Sorry for what?" I asked. "For cheating? For letting her take everything I built? For making me invisible in my own home?" He swallowed hard. "For all of it." I nodded slowly. "Good, then you finally said it out loud. That's your start, not mine." He blinked, as if he didn't understand. "Mabel, can't we talk? Maybe start over?" "Richard," I said gently, "you can't rebuild something that never had a foundation." He opened his mouth, closed it, and stepped back. For a second, I saw it, regret. Deep and raw. But regret isn't love, it's just memory with guilt attached. Take care of yourself, I said. And I meant it. I walked away, leaving him standing by the refrigerated aisle, holding nothing. That night, I returned home and found Nora waiting at the door with 2 cups of tea. Long day? She asked. Closure, I said simply. She raised an eyebrow. And how does it taste? Like cold coffee, I said, bitter, but it wakes you up. We both laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that comes from surviving something heavy. Then Nora leaned closer. You know, she said, when I lost my husband, I thought I'd never feel strong again. But strength isn't loud, it's quiet, it's the way you breathe after the storm and realize you're still here. I looked at her, really looked at her. Maybe life had sent me to this little flower shop for a reason. That night, before going to bed, I took out my journal again. I wrote, "Forgiveness isn't a gift you give others. It's the key you turn to walk out of their cage." Then I closed the book, placed it on the nightstand, and turned off the lamp. Through the open window, I could hear the faint rustle of leaves and the hum of distant traffic. The city kept moving, indifferent and alive. And so did I. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. I made coffee, fed the cat Nora insisted I adopt, and stepped out onto the small balcony. The sky was still dark, but there was a strip of pale pink at the horizon. I hadn't watched a sunrise in years. As the light slowly filled the streets below, I whispered to myself, "This is what starting over looks like. Quiet, unapologetic." My phone buzzed on the table behind me. A message from Daniel. "Mom, I saw the papers. I know everything now. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. Can we talk?" I smiled. It wasn't victory. It was validation. I typed back, "Whenever you're ready, son." Then I set the phone down and went back to watching the sun climb higher. The warmth touched my face. Soft and steady. No longer burning. Just light. By the time Daniel came to visit, the leaves had already started to turn. The trees lining the street outside my apartment glowed amber and rust. Like they were quietly burning from the inside. I'd spent the morning arranging flowers downstairs for Nora, losing myself in their scent. When I heard the doorbell upstairs, I knew it was him before I even looked. "Hi, Mom," he said softly when I opened the door. He looked exhausted, eyes hollow. Jaw tight. Guilt had a way of hollowing people out faster than grief ever could. "Come in," I said, "I just made tea." He stepped inside, glancing around the small apartment. It was neat, quiet, simple, nothing like the house I'd built and filled with other people's noise. "This place suits you," he said. "It suits peace," I replied, something I never had enough of. We sat at the table in silence for a while. Then he took a deep breath. "I found the papers," he said, "the ones Emily tried to have Dad sign." I didn't move, didn't react. "And the DNA report," he added, "I saw that too." He rubbed his temples, like the truth itself hurt to hold. "I can't believe it, Mom, I didn't want to, but it's all there." "It always was," I said quietly, "you just weren't ready to see it." He looked up, shame flickering across his face. "She lied to me, to both of us. I feel like an idiot." "You're not," I said softly, "you're just your father's son." He winced, but didn't argue. Then he reached across the table, his hand trembling slightly. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you." I covered his hand with mine. "You believe me now, that's enough." He stayed for hours. We didn't talk much after that. He asked about my new life. About Nora, about how I spent my days. I told him the truth. I read. I walked. I worked with flowers. He smiled faintly. "You sound happy." "I'm learning," I said. "Happiness isn't loud, it's the absence of pretending." Before he left, he hesitated at the door. "Mom, what should I do about Dad?" "Whatever you need to," I said. "Just remember, saving someone who never asked to be saved can drown you both." He nodded slowly, then hugged me tight. When he left, I stood in the doorway long after his footsteps faded. 2 days later, the storm began. Not the kind that comes with rain, but with whispers. Clara called again. "Mrs. Hale, it's all over town," she said breathlessly. "Emily's been telling people you framed her, that you made up the test results." I smiled to myself. Of course she is. When liars lose control, they start rewriting the story. "She's saying you paid someone at the clinic," Clara continued. "Then she'll have to prove it," I replied. And we both knew she couldn't. By the weekend, the rumor had spread. Friends called, neighbors whispered, even old church acquaintances sent polite messages pretending to check in. The small-town gossip mill spun faster than ever. Nora handed me the phone one morning. "It's Richard," she said softly. I stared at the name flashing on the screen, then shook my head. "Not today." She nodded and hung up. For weeks, I'd imagined what it would feel like to be free of their noise. Now I had it, and it was both beautiful and strange, like standing in a house after a hurricane. The quiet almost too heavy to breathe. That evening, as I was closing the shop, a familiar car pulled up outside. Richard stepped out. He looked older again, thinner, the sharpness in his eyes dulled to something weary. He waited at the door until I opened it. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. "You could have gone home," I replied. He gave a dry laugh. "That house isn't a home anymore." I crossed my arms. "Whose fault is that?" "I know," he said quietly. "I deserve that." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Mabel, she's trying to ruin you. She's told people you falsified evidence. That you're losing your mind." "Let her," I said calmly. "The truth doesn't need defending. It just needs time." He looked at me then. Really looked. There was something unfamiliar in his gaze, respect. Maybe, or the shadow of it. "You've changed," he said. "No," I answered. "I just stopped being the version of me that made your life easier." He opened his mouth to speak, but I stopped him. "I don't want your protection. Richard, I wanted it once, but you weren't capable of giving it. Now, I'm capable of protecting myself." For the first time, he didn't argue. He just nodded. When he left, he said, "If you ever need anything." I smiled faintly. I already have everything I need, truth. The following morning, Nora came into the shop carrying a newspaper. "Mabel," she said, eyes wide, "you should see this." On the front page was a photo of Emily leaving the courthouse. Face hidden behind sunglasses. The headline read, "Local woman under investigation for property fraud." Apparently, one of the lawyers she'd contacted had turned over documents showing her intent to forge my signature. Justice, it seemed, had a strange sense of timing. Nora grinned. "You didn't even lift a finger." "I didn't have to," I said. "Rot spreads on its own once the light hits it." That afternoon, Daniel called again. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I can't believe she did all that. The police came this morning. She's been questioned." I stayed quiet, letting him process it. He continued, "Dad's devastated. He keeps saying he should have seen it coming." "He should have," I said gently, "but guilt won't fix anything. It never does." He hesitated. "Will you ever talk to him again?" "Maybe," I said, "but only as the woman I am now, not the one who used to wait for his apologies." Later that evening, Nora locked up early and brought out 2 glasses of red wine. "To survival," she said, raising her glass. "To silence that speaks louder than revenge," I replied. We drank quietly, watching the sun dip below the city's edge. Outside, people hurried past, each carrying their own secrets, their own small storms. Nora broke the silence. "You know, Mabel, some people spend their whole lives waiting for closure. But I think you found something better." "What's that?" "Peace." I smiled. "Peace doesn't mean forgetting. It just means nothing they do can touch you anymore." Before bed, I opened my journal again. The pages smelled faintly of tea and ink. I flipped to a blank one and wrote, "When lies finally rot, they smell like freedom. Truth doesn't need revenge, it needs air." I closed the book, set it beside my bed, and turned off the light. Through the window, I could see the faint glow of the florist's sign below. A single word shimmered in the glass reflection, bloom. And I realized that was what I'd done. Bloomed. Not in spite of them, but because I finally left the garden that kept cutting me. The news spread faster than I expected. By the end of the week, everyone in town had read about Emily's property scandal. I didn't need to say a word, the truth was finally doing its job. Still, part of me felt unfinished. Not angry, just aware. There was a conversation I still needed to have. One that had been brewing, slow and steady, like a pot of tea left on low heat. So I called her. "Emily," I said, when she finally picked up. There was silence, then a sharp inhale. "You have some nerve calling me." "I do," I said evenly, "and I'd like to use it. Come by the flower shop tomorrow at 3. Alone." She laughed bitterly. "Why would I do that?" "Because, my dear, you've already lost everything else. What's one more conversation?" I hung up before she could answer. The next afternoon, the bell above the door rang. She entered wearing dark sunglasses and a forced air of confidence. I recognized the perfume first, sweet, heavy, the same one that used to linger in my dining room. Now it smelled like decay. "Tea?" I asked, motioning to the small table by the window. She hesitated, then sat down. Her hands were shaking. I poured the tea slowly. The silence between us was heavier than the steam rising from the cups. She finally broke it. "You think you've won, don't you?" "This isn't a competition," I said, "it's a reckoning." Her lips curled into a smirk. "You think the world's on your side because of some newspaper article? You think people believe you're innocent?" "I don't care what they believe," I said softly. "The truth doesn't need believers. It only needs light." She leaned forward. "You ruined my life." "No," I replied. "You did that yourself. I just stopped covering for you." For a moment, the mask slipped. Her bravado faltered. And beneath it, I saw what she really was, scared. "You don't understand," she said, voice trembling. "I was desperate. I wanted security. Your husband, he promised." I raised a hand to stop her. "Don't say his name. He's not your shield anymore." Tears welled in her eyes, though I couldn't tell if they were real. "I loved him," she whispered. "No," I said gently. "You loved the reflection of yourself you saw in his guilt." She went silent. I poured her another cup of tea, though she didn't touch it. Then I reached into my bag and placed a small envelope on the table between us. "This," I said, "is for you." Her eyes darted to it. "What is it?" "Proof," I said, "of how far I'm willing to go." She reached for it with shaking hands and opened it. Inside was a single photocopy, the DNA report. The same one that had destroyed her illusion. Her fingers tightened on the paper. "Why are you showing me this again?" "To remind you," I said quietly, "that truth has a longer memory than lies." She looked up, and for the first time, I saw something shift behind her eyes. Anger giving way to shame. Or maybe fear. "You could have gone to the police," she said softly. "I still could," I replied. She froze. Then I leaned forward, my voice calm, almost kind. "But I won't. You've already lost everything that matters. Jail would be mercy." Her breath hitched. "Then what do you want from me?" "Nothing," I said, "just your silence. No more gossip, no more lies. You'll disappear, and I'll never speak your name again." She looked down at the tea, her reflection rippling in it like a ghost. After a long pause, she whispered, "You're colder than I thought." I smiled faintly. "No, just finally room temperature." The bell over the door jingled. Nora appeared, holding a tray of sugar cookies. "Oh," she said, pretending surprise, "I didn't know you had company." "Just finishing up," I replied. Emily rose from her seat. Her lipstick was smudged, her voice brittle. "I hope you choke on your piece," she said. I met her gaze without flinching. "Peace doesn't choke, it breeds." And then she left. Just like that. No slamming door, no screaming. Only the faint sound of heels fading into the street. When the shop was quiet again, Nora came over and sat across from me. Was that who I think it was? Yes, I said. She looked like a ghost. She is, I murmured, just doesn't know it yet. Nora sipped her tea and studied me. You handled that well. I'd have thrown the cup at her. I smiled. I used to throw my dignity away like that. Not anymore. That night, Daniel called again. I heard Emily's leaving town. He said, she called her sister in Denver. That's good, I replied. He hesitated. You really don't hate her, do you? I paused, thinking carefully. No, I don't hate her. I outgrew her. He exhaled, relief mingling with confusion. I don't know how you stay so calm. Because calm is how you win. Daniel, I said softly, noise is just weakness trying to sound important. The next morning, I opened the shop early. The sun was bright, almost blinding. The scent of lilies filled the air. Nora was already arranging bouquets when I noticed a single folded note under the door. It was from Emily. No signature, just a few words written in shaky pen. You were right, I never loved anyone, I just didn't want to be nothing. I'm leaving, don't follow. I folded the note and placed it in my journal. Not as a trophy. As closure. By evening, Richard came by. He looked tired, smaller somehow. Daniel told me, he said quietly, she's gone. I know. I never thanked you for stopping her from ruining everything. I looked at him, steady and unblinking. She didn't ruin it, Richard, you both did. She just signed her name where you left a blank. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. I don't expect forgiveness. Good, I said, then we finally agree on something. He looked around the flower shop, the rows of plants, the soft light, the peace he'd never given me. You seem happy. I am, I said. Happiness isn't revenge, it's rebuilding without them noticing. He nodded slowly, a faint sadness crossing his face. Goodbye, Mabel. Goodbye, Richard. He left, and the bell chimed softly behind him. I stood still for a moment, staring at the door he'd walked through. Then I whispered to the empty room. It's finally quiet. That night, Nora poured us each a glass of wine. 2 endings, she said. 2 beginnings disguised as endings, I replied. We clinked glasses, and for the first time, the sound didn't echo. It settled, warm and full, right where it belonged. Before bed, I opened my journal again and wrote. Today, I shared tea with my enemy and left her with her reflection. The storm didn't end with thunder. It ended with silence. Then I placed the pen down, closed the book, and turned off the light. Outside, the moon glowed over the shop sign, Bloom. And for the first time, I understood. Blooming wasn't about sunlight. It was about surviving the dark long enough to see it. 2 weeks passed. The air turned colder, the evenings darker, and the town quieter. I'd begun to think that maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed. Then, one Thursday afternoon, the peace broke. I was trimming stems in the flower shop when Nora came rushing in from the front door. Her face was pale, her voice a whisper. Mabel, she's back. I didn't need to ask who. I turned, scissors still in hand. Emily? Nora nodded. She's outside, and she doesn't look well. When I stepped into the street, I saw her. Standing by a lamppost, drenched from the drizzle, her hair unkempt, her coat hanging open. She looked nothing like the polished woman who once strutted through my dining room. This Emily was shaking, part fear, part rage, part desperation. Mabel, she called out, her voice hoarse. I told you to leave, I said evenly. I tried, she snapped, but I can't. She stumbled closer. Her eyes were wild, ringed with sleepless nights. You don't get it, you destroyed me. No, I said softly, I revealed you, you destroyed yourself. She laughed, a hollow, broken sound. You think you're better than me? You're just an old woman who got lucky. Luck has nothing to do with it, I replied, only truth. She took another step forward, voice trembling. I lost everything. Daniel won't speak to me. Richard's reputation is gone. I'm being audited. For God's sake. You made those choices, Emily. I made them because I wanted what you had, she shouted. Security, respect, a place in that house. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time. I didn't see a villain. I saw a frightened girl who'd mistaken greed for survival. Come inside, I said quietly, before you catch pneumonia. She blinked, surprised. What? I'm not offering forgiveness, I said, just warmth, temporary warmth. Inside the shop, Nora watched silently as I led Emily to a chair near the heater. I poured her tea. She stared at it for a long moment, hands trembling too much to lift the cup. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Because cruelty's your language, not mine, I said, and I refused to speak it. She let out a shaky breath. I thought if I could just be part of that family, I'd finally matter, but the truth is, none of them cared about me. Not Richard, not even Daniel. That's what happens, I said, when you build your worth on someone else's weakness. Her eyes filled with tears. For the first time, she didn't fight them. I thought I was winning, she said softly, but every lie just dug the hole deeper. I nodded. That's how lies work. They look like ladders until they're not. The bell above the door chimed again. I turned, and there was Daniel. He froze at the sight of her. Mom, what is she doing here? Emily stood abruptly. I came to talk, she said quickly, to explain. There's nothing to explain, Daniel said, his tone sharp. You humiliated my family, tried to steal from us, lied about everything. I know, she cried, I know, but I never meant for it to go that far. You always mean it, he said coldly, you just never expect consequences. Tears streamed down her face. Daniel, please, I loved you. He shook his head. No, you loved control. I stepped forward then, gently placing a hand on his arm. Let her speak, I said quietly, let her empty the poison once and for all. Emily looked between us, chest heaving. I was pregnant, she said, voice shaking, but I lost the baby. Before the test ever came out. Daniel's eyes widened. You lied about that too? She nodded, collapsing into the chair. I panicked. I wanted to keep you. And your father, he made me believe I could. The room fell silent. Even Nora stopped moving behind the counter. Daniel's face went pale. My father, he whispered. I took a slow breath. Now you see, I said softly, why I didn't fight to stay. He turned to me, his eyes full of realization and sorrow. Mom, I'm so sorry. I shook my head. Don't be. I survived what both of them thought would break me. Emily stood again, her shoulders slumped, her face drained of all color. I don't want money, she said. I don't want forgiveness. I just needed someone to know I wasn't always this person. I looked at her, searching for any trace of the woman who once whispered venom into my ear. There was none. People become what they believe, I said quietly. You believed you could only win by destroying others. Now you see what that victory looks like. She stared at the floor, silent. Then she reached into her coat pocket and placed something on the table, my old wedding ring. I found it, she whispered. It was in the drawer after you left. I thought, maybe you'd want it back. I stared at the ring for a long time. Then I pushed it back toward her. No, I said softly, you keep it, a reminder that everything borrowed eventually returns home. She nodded once, tears spilling down her cheeks, then turned and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped and looked back at me. You're stronger than all of us, she said. I smiled faintly. No, I just stopped kneeling. After she left, Daniel sat heavily in the chair she'd been in moments before. He looked at me, exhausted but clear-eyed. What happens now? He asked. Now? I said. Now we stop surviving and start living. He nodded slowly. Then, after a pause, he said, I want you to move back home. I shook my head. That house was never mine. You build your own, Daniel. Fill it with truth this time. He smiled sadly. Maybe I'll start by helping you here. I reached across the table, touching his hand. That would be nice. That evening, after he left, Nora locked up the shop and joined me by the window. Seems like the ghosts finally spoke their last words, she said. They did, I replied, and none of them were worth keeping. We watched the rain begin to fall again, soft and steady. It wasn't the kind of rain that destroyed, it was the kind that cleansed. Before bed, I sat at my small desk and opened my journal once more. The pages had begun to curl at the edges from constant use. I turned to a new page and wrote. She came back with nothing left to hide. Truth stripped her bare, but I didn't need revenge, only distance. Sometimes, the cruelest punishment is watching someone become what they feared most. I closed the book and set it down beside the lamp. Through the window, the neon bloom sign flickered softly in the rain. And I realized that peace doesn't come when the storm ends. It comes when you finally stop waiting for thunder. The next morning, the air felt heavy again, like the calm before something finally collapses. The confrontation had ended, yes, but consequences have their own slow rhythm. They don't arrive when you expect them to. They arrive when you've just started to breathe. I was unlocking the flower shop when Nora handed me the morning paper. Mabel, she said softly, you might want to sit down. On the front page, in small black print beneath the fold, was a familiar name. Richard Hale, local businessman under investigation for financial misconduct. For a long moment, I just stared at it. No anger, no surprise. Only that hollow recognition of something you've known in your bones for years finally catching up to daylight. By noon, Daniel called. His voice was shaking. Mom, did you see the paper? I did. It's bad, he said. They've frozen his accounts. Apparently, he's been hiding money, Emily's, maybe others. There's talk of fraud. I said nothing. He continued, his breath ragged. I went to check on him. He looks broken. He's drinking again. He said you're the reason it's all falling apart. I closed my eyes. I'm not, I said quietly. Truth is. Mom, Daniel whispered, what do I do? Let him face it, I said. You can't save a man who's drowning himself. Later that day, Clara stopped by the shop. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if the truth might be following her too. Mrs. Hale, she said softly, I shouldn't even be telling you this, but the investigators came to the house. They're taking everything, files, computers, even Richard's old ledgers. I nodded slowly. He must have known this was coming. Clara hesitated. He said something strange before they took him for questioning. What did he say? He said, Mabel told me silence was safer. She was right, but silence can't save me now. For the first time, I felt something close to pity. Not for the man he was, but for the man he could have been. That evening, Daniel came by. His shoulders were slumped, his face pale. Mom, he said, they're indicting him. He's not going to jail yet. But. His voice cracked. This will ruin him. I poured him tea, letting the silence stretch between us before speaking. Ruins aren't always bad, I said. They remind us what happens when we build on lies. He looked at me helplessly. You sound so calm. I've already lived through the worst. I said, everything now is just cleanup. A few days later, I found an envelope under my apartment door. Inside was a letter, written in Richard's uneven handwriting. Mabel. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. For the years I made you small. For believing peace came from silence. It didn't. It came from you. Take care of Daniel. Tell him I'm proud of him. Even if I never said it out loud. You were always stronger than I deserved. R. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the back of my journal. Not as a keepsake. As closure. The scandal spread quickly. Neighbors whispered, colleagues avoided eye contact, old friends stopped calling. For years, I'd feared humiliation more than anything. Now that it was here, it didn't touch me. It belonged to him, not me. Nora found me that night sitting outside the shop, sipping tea under the fading porch light. You heard about the arrest? She asked gently. I did. She sat beside me, quiet for a moment. Do you feel free now? I thought about it. Freedom, I realized, isn't one moment. It's a series of small choices that no one applauds. I feel finished, I said, and that's close enough. The following Sunday, Daniel asked me to come by the house. The same house I once scrubbed, decorated, filled with laughter and food. Now it stood cold and quiet, the paint chipping, curtains drawn. When I walked in, the air smelled like dust and whiskey. Richard sat in his old chair, eyes dull, hands shaking. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize him. "Mabel," he said weakly, "you came." "I did," I replied, "to say goodbye properly this time." He gave a faint smile. "I deserve worse than this." "Yes," I said simply, "but I don't wish it on you." He looked up, startled. "You don't?" "No," I said, "hate is just another way of staying tied to you." He nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes for the first time. "Do you remember," he whispered, "our first Christmas here?" I smiled faintly. "The burnt turkey and the broken lights?" He chuckled softly, then coughed. "Even then," he said, "you made everything feel right." "I did what I thought love was," I said. "Turns out, it was survival." We sat in silence. Then I stood, smoothing my coat. "I'll make sure Daniel's okay," I said. He nodded, eyes glossy. "Thank you." I turned to leave. Before I reached the door, I heard him whisper, almost to himself, "You always were the better one." Outside, the sky was the color of bruised steel. The wind carried the faint sound of church bells from downtown. I stood there for a long time, watching the house fade into the distance as I walked away. When I reached the corner, I realized I wasn't crying. Not out of coldness, but because there was nothing left to grieve. That night, Daniel called again. "He's going to plead guilty," he said quietly. "It'll be in the papers next week." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I'll visit him," Daniel added. "He needs someone." "I know," I said. "He still has you. That's enough." "Will you ever see him again?" "No," I said softly. "He's not in my story anymore." Later, I wrote one final note in my journal under the heading "The Hale House." When lies collapse, they take the roof with them. But sometimes, standing outside the wreckage, you finally see the stars. In the following days, people stopped whispering about me. They began whispering about Emily instead, how she'd left town again. How she'd sold her jewelry to pay off debts. No one asked my opinion, and I didn't offer one. Silence had become my favorite kind of truth. One afternoon, a young woman came into the shop. She introduced herself as a reporter. "Mrs. Hale," she said, "we're writing about the recent investigation. Would you like to give a statement?" I looked at her kindly. "No," I said, "I've already said everything worth saying by leaving." That evening, Nora found me closing the shop a bit earlier than usual. "Going somewhere?" she asked. "Just home," I said. "There's a piece there that doesn't need witnesses." She smiled. "You've earned it." "I didn't earn it," I said. "I learned it." Before bed, I made a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window. The city lights shimmered below, soft and distant. I thought about the years I'd lost to someone else's comfort, the sacrifices buried under politeness, the silences mistaken for loyalty. Then I thought about now, this small apartment, these quiet nights, the laughter I sometimes shared with Nora or Daniel. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was starting over. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. In my journal, I wrote, "The house may have fallen, but I'm still standing. The noise has faded, the truth remains." Then I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and let the stillness fill the room. Outside, the moonlight brushed against the Bloom sign once more. And somewhere, far away, the old Hale house sat silent, finally, mercifully, empty. Autumn slipped quietly into winter. The flower shop windows fogged with every breath, and the air outside smelled like cinnamon and cold rain. Life had slowed down to a kind of rhythm that finally made sense. No more whispers, no more battles, just days that began and ended in peace. I'd stopped checking the newspaper weeks ago. Richard's trial had come and gone. He pled guilty, just as Daniel said he would. The headlines moved on quickly, as they always do. The world forgets fast. But peace, real peace, arrives slowly. Most mornings, I opened the shop early. Nora would hum old jazz tunes as she trimmed roses, and I'd brew coffee strong enough to wake the whole block. The customers came and went, young couples buying anniversary bouquets, old men picking single stems for graves. I never asked their stories. I'd learned that some wounds heal faster when left unnamed. Still, there were days when I caught myself looking out the window, waiting for something. Not Richard, not Emily. Just a sign that life had truly started again. One afternoon, I found it. A young woman entered the shop, holding a small plant in a cracked pot. Her hands were red from the cold. "Can you help me?" she asked softly. "It's dying. I've tried everything." I looked at the plant, its leaves limp, roots tangled. "Too much water," I said. "You're drowning it." Her eyes widened. "I just wanted to keep it alive." "Sometimes," I said, smiling, "care can smother just as much as neglect." She nodded, absorbing the words like they meant more than gardening advice. As she left, she said quietly, "Thank you, for the plant and the truth." After she walked out, I stood there a moment, realizing something. I'd become what I never expected to be again, useful. Not as a wife, not as a caretaker, but as a person. Daniel started visiting more often. He'd bring groceries, sometimes coffee, sometimes nothing but conversation. We'd sit by the window, watching the streetlights flicker to life. One evening, he asked, "Do you ever miss him?" I thought about it for a moment. Miss him? No. Miss who I thought he was? Sometimes. He nodded slowly, his eyes distant. "I keep wondering what kind of man I'll become, knowing I came from both of you." "Maybe that's the point," I said. "You get to choose which parts to keep." He smiled faintly. "I think I'll keep your calm and his stubbornness." "Good mix," I said. "Just don't let either turn into silence." That night, after he left, I lit a candle and sat at the table with my journal open. The words came easier now. No shaking hands. No anger. Just clarity. Freedom isn't loud. It's the quiet choice to stop explaining yourself to those who never listened. I looked around my apartment, the tidy shelves, the soft glow of lamplight, the faint hum of life outside, and felt something new. Not emptiness. Not victory. Just peace with my own company. A few days later, Nora surprised me. She'd closed the shop early and told me to put on my coat. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Just drive," she said with that mischievous grin. We ended up by the lake, the same one where I'd once opened the DNA envelope months ago. The water shimmered under a silver sky. Nora unpacked a thermos of hot cocoa and 2 paper cups. "You used to come here with him, didn't you?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "back when I thought love meant staying no matter how much it hurt." She handed me a cup. "And now?" "Now," I said, "I know love starts when you finally leave." We sat there in comfortable silence, sipping cocoa and listening to the gentle ripples of the lake. The same water that once reflected my heartbreak now reflected freedom. Winter deepened. Snow began to fall, soft, unhurried. Business slowed at the shop, but I didn't mind. I filled the quiet hours with small joys, writing letters I never sent, baking cookies I gave away, feeding the stray cat that slept near the back door. One morning, I found a small envelope in the mail slot. No return address. Inside was a check, folded neatly, with a note written in Richard's handwriting. For the shop, consider it a debt repaid. No apology this time, no plea for understanding. Just acknowledgement. And that was enough. I didn't cash it right away. I left it on the counter for a week, as a reminder that closure doesn't always arrive dressed as forgiveness. Sometimes, it shows up in plain envelopes, without fanfare. By February, I'd made a decision. The apartment above the shop felt like a resting place, not a destination. So I bought a small cottage on the outskirts of town, nothing fancy. Just a patch of land, a porch swing, And enough space for a garden. When I told Nora, she cried. When do we start packing? She asked. We spent days sorting boxes, laughing over things neither of us remembered owning. When it was time to move, Daniel brought his truck and carried the heaviest boxes himself. At one point, he paused and looked at the empty flower shop. This place saved you, he said. It did, I replied, but it's time for something that's mine. The cottage was perfect in its simplicity. The first night there, I sat by the window, watching snow gather on the porch railings. The air smelled of pine and quiet beginnings. It wasn't a house built by promises, it was one built by choice. I planted tulip bulbs in the frozen soil, knowing they wouldn't bloom until spring. Still, the act felt symbolic. After years of being buried under lies, I finally understood what it meant to plant something for yourself. Weeks passed peacefully. Daniel visited on weekends, Nora every other day. Sometimes we'd sit by the fire. Sometimes we'd say nothing at all. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt earned. One evening, as I watched the fire crackle, I realized something. I hadn't thought about revenge in weeks. Not once. It was as if peace had quietly erased the need for it. Before bed, I wrote one last entry in my journal for the season. Today, I stood in my own home and didn't feel like a guest. The walls don't echo anymore. They listen. For the first time in decades. So do I. I closed the book, placed it on the nightstand, and smiled. Outside, snow kept falling, soft as forgiveness. Not the kind that asks. The kind that simply arrives when the world goes still. Spring arrived late that year. The snow melted slowly, leaving the garden soft and damp beneath my boots. Tiny green shoots pushed through the soil, stubborn, unbothered by how long winter had overstayed its welcome. I watched them from the porch each morning with a cup of coffee in my hands. The same hands that once trembled at a dinner table now felt steady. Weathered, strong. It's funny how time doesn't heal you, it just teaches you which pain is no longer worth holding. The cottage smelled of new beginnings. Faint lavender from the candles, fresh paint on the window frames, a hint of coffee and cinnamon that seemed to cling to everything. I had grown used to the quiet, the kind of silence that used to scare me. Now it felt like a friend. One morning, Daniel came by, carrying a basket of groceries. "Mom," he said, smiling, "you've turned this place into a postcard." I laughed. It's easier to decorate when the only person you're trying to please is yourself. He followed me to the kitchen. The windows were open, and the sound of birds drifted in, soft, distant, alive. "You've really moved on, haven't you?" he asked. I paused, looking out at the tulips beginning to bloom. "Moving on isn't about forgetting, Daniel," I said quietly. "It's about remembering without the pain." He nodded, his voice gentle. "Dad wanted me to tell you something. He's leaving town, going somewhere quiet." I didn't ask where. I didn't need to. "Did he say anything else?" He hesitated. "Just that you were right. About everything." I smiled, a small, tired smile. "That's not a victory, son. It's just the truth catching up to the past." After he left, I walked into the garden and knelt in the dirt. The tulip bulbs I'd planted months ago were finally blooming, small bursts of color pushing against the wind. Red, yellow, and one lone white blossom right in the center. I brushed the soil from my hands and felt a strange stillness settle inside me. I had been buried once. Too, under lies, under duty, under the weight of someone else's comfort. And yet, here I was. Blooming anyway. That evening, Nora visited with a bottle of wine. "To new seasons," she said, raising her glass. "To new roots," I replied. We sat on the porch until the sun dipped low and the first stars began to blink awake. She looked at me over her glass. "Do you ever think about what you'd say to her, if you saw her again?" "Emily?" I asked. She nodded. I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "There's nothing left to say. Some people are lessons, not conversations." Nora smiled softly. "And Richard?" I let out a long breath. I forgave him quietly, one morning while folding laundry. Not for his sake, for mine. She chuckled. That's the most Mabel thing I've ever heard. We both laughed. The sound light and genuine, the kind that doesn't echo. Just settles where it belongs. After she left, I stayed outside a while longer. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of rain and lilac. The moon hung low and golden over the garden, the tulips swaying gently beneath it. I thought about all the versions of myself that had lived and died in the last year. The obedient wife. The silent mother. The broken woman who laughed when her world collapsed. Each of them had built a bridge to this moment. To the woman sitting alone, peaceful, unafraid. I went inside and opened my old journal one last time. The pages were nearly full now, ink-stained confessions, half-erased pain, and quiet victories that no one but me would ever read. I turned to the final page and wrote slowly, letting each word settle before the next. They called me bitter, but I was just awake. They mistook my silence for surrender, but it was survival. They thought betrayal would end me, but it taught me freedom. I lost everything that wasn't real, and that's how I found myself. I closed the book, ran my fingers along its worn cover, and smiled. Then I walked to the window. Outside, the garden shimmered under the moonlight. A soft breeze moved through the tulips, bending them slightly, never breaking them. And I thought, maybe that's all resilience really is. Not standing tall. Just bending without snapping. The next morning, the doorbell rang. It was the postman, holding a small brown package. No sender listed, he said. I took it, curious. Inside was a framed photograph. Me, Daniel, and Richard, taken decades ago at Daniel's graduation. I remembered that day. The pride in Richard's eyes. The sun on our faces. The hope that still lived in the spaces between us. Tucked behind the frame was a note in Richard's handwriting. For Mabel, because not all stories end badly. Some just end honestly. I placed the photo on the mantel. Not as a wound. As a witness. That night, I brewed myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window again. The sky was clear, and the first fireflies of spring blinked through the dark. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a car passed, and life went on, steady, unremarkable, perfect in its ordinariness. I sipped my tea, the warmth settling in my chest. Then I whispered, to no one in particular, maybe to the woman I used to be. You did it, you survived them all. The house was quiet, but not empty. Every corner carried something alive, plants, books, laughter, light. The kind of home built by choice, not compromise. As I got up to turn off the lights, I glanced at the mirror by the door. For a moment, I saw her, the woman from that family dinner long ago. The one who smiled through humiliation and betrayal. But she wasn't sad anymore. She just nodded, as if to say, we made it. Before bed, I wrote one last line in my journal beneath all the others. People think revenge is loud, but peace is the quietest victory of all. I closed the book, blew out the candle, and let the darkness wrap gently around me. Outside, the wind rustled through the tulips, carrying with it the faint scent of freedom. And as I drifted to sleep, I realized something simple, something final. The truth doesn't always destroy. Sometimes, it redeems.